Hey everybody, this is Vegan Theology with Kevin and Sarah Hale, episode 71.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, boys and girls. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We are looking at our next chapter in this, what's turning out to be a very interesting book.
Yeah.
Ask the Animals, Developing a Biblical Animal Hermeneutic, edited by Arthur Walker Jones, Susanna Miller. This chapter, I remember last episode, I almost said and next time we'll be discussing and reading the title of this chapter, but I was like, I'm not going to because I have no idea what that's going to be about.
Right.
Here's the title of this chapter: Monsters, Beasts, and Animals. So 3 categories there that we're going to be looking at: monsters, beasts, and animals. The taxonomy of fierce creatureliness in the biblical text and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
That'll give you some indication of what it's like to read this chapter, because while it turned out to be very, very interesting, I did have to go through the chapter numerous times before I started to feel like I was getting a handle.
Right.
Because
and the author is Robert Paul Seesengood?
Yes. I did look into him a little bit. He's a professor, I forget at what college.
Dr. Robert Paul Seesengood. He has an MDiv, a THM, and a PhD. Just looking at his CV here.
What's a CV?
Oh, it's like a resume. It's everywhere, I think, with the United States. They just call it it's Latin. Curriculum vitae or something like that. I probably said that wrong, but looks like as of 2024, he was an Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, teaching professor of Bible and Cultures at Drew Theological University, which is in Madison, New Jersey. And yeah, so it looks like his PhD, Biblical Studies, New Testament, Early Christianity. And his dissertation was Running with Endurance, Sports and Athletic Metaphors in Nascent Christian Literature. Anyway, yeah, it looks like he went to Princeton, THM. That's pretty badass. So, all right. Anyway, yeah, on and on.
Okay. So this chapter takes us back to Job, which I'm really glad.
Yeah.
And it is with a degree of humility. I'm just going to say this right out of the gate to get it off my chest, that I feel like I really got schooled by reading this, because I now disagree with some of the things I said 2 episodes ago. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a voice within that says, I should have known better.
Yeah.
I should have done better. So this is, in some ways, this is going to be corrective of...
No, but that's good. That's the point of this too, right? And I'll say one of the feelings I had in reading this book, and again, this is I've said this earlier, this is put out by SBL, this is legit. Yes, we could have run into this. In fact, I went back and read some Walton from his Genesis commentary, and of course he agrees with what's being said here, which we're going to get into. But there's just a lot to know. There's just a lot to study. There's a lot to know. And I keep being dissatisfied with the frequency of podcasts we're putting out. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we are taking on a big task in many ways. And yet I worry all the time that we're barely scratching the surface. So
right. So yeah, it takes time. Time is a very precious commodity. And we would love to do this a lot more frequently and regularly. But then even with the infrequency, I feel like we're not going as deep as we would like to.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a struggle. So
it is. And I mean, I guess I hate to say it this way, doing our best to do what we can do, but there's so much to know. Obviously, I wish I was doing this full time because it's fun and it takes a lot of time.
Okay, so this mistake that I feel like I made, for sure, part of what makes me mad about that mistake is that reading his take and realizing there's a lot of scholarship, including by Walton, on his take, I recognize it. I'm like, oh yeah, we have actually talked about that a little bit before. We kind of knew that a little bit before, but I didn't connect it to Job. And what I'm talking about, he spends the first part of this chapter saying it's too bad, really, that people approach the text, people approach Job with, their scientific sensibilities, especially when it comes to talking about the monsters in Job. So if you recall a couple episodes ago when we were discussing some of the chapters of Job, and we wanted to focus on how there's several chapters where God responds to Job. And the way that God responds partly is by discussing all of God's creatures, all of the non-human animals that God created and who God takes care of and watches over. And then God goes into talking about these two creatures, the Leviathan and the Behemoth. And I remember saying on our episode, some people say that these are just mythological monsters, creatures, but that doesn't really make sense to me. Why would God be talking about all the creatures who God created and then turn around and talk about mythological creatures? I don't understand that. So I was saying maybe these were creatures who have gone extinct, or maybe they are creatures that are still alive, but we call them by a different name somehow. So he's kind of making fun of that or calling that to task. It's not the best way to approach the text.
Right.
Because, and this is where we get into, I kind of feel like I should have known that. He brings us back to the ancient Near Eastern cosmology, which we discussed a little bit in its own episode.
But it's
long
big,
ago.
right? I mean, it's big. Books have been written on it, so.
Early on in one of our episodes, we were discussing the Hebrew creation myth, and we were looking for a paradigm by which to approach it. And so we borrowed heavily from John Walton, who helped us understand that in the ancient Near Eastern mind, the universe, of course, is not understood in terms of modern physics.
Right.
But they saw it as a system defined by function, order, and purpose. And so that's how they construct the creation myth, that God is giving function, order, and purpose.
Right.
The ancients categorize reality into three states: order, the ordered cosmos; non-order, which is uninhabited, unassigned, or chaotic; and disorder, which would be active rebellion against divine order. So there's order, which I think we can get our head around pretty well. And then there's just this chaotic, unassigned non-order, which isn't necessarily malevolent.
Right. In Genesis, when it says the world was formless and dark, that's kind of the non-order.
And then disorder, which is more of an act of rebellion against the divine order. So just to say a little bit more about that, order is, this state represents the habitable world functioning according to divine design, governed by established laws, justice, cyclical rhythms. In Mesopotamian and Egyptian thought, civilization and kingships were viewed as earthly reflections of this heavenly order. Interesting. And then non-order, which is chaos, is often depicted as primordial, formless abyss or untamed wilderness. It is not inherently evil, but rather useless, purposeless, undeveloped. Examples included uncultivated deserts, untamed oceans, and undifferentiated time. And then we have disorder, which could be termed hostile chaos. This represents active forces that threaten to dismantle or undo the cosmos. Disorder is characterized by violence, drought, pestilence, and the overturning of social and moral structures. So, with that in mind, he points out that the behemoth and the Leviathan that appear in Job also show up throughout the Old Testament in Amos, a few times in Psalms, in Isaiah, and then, of course, famously in Job. So these were monsters in the ancient Near Eastern person's mind that represented hostile chaos, disorder, active forces that were threatening to dismantle or undo cosmos, violent monsters. And yeah, it was really humbling for me to realize that God brings up these monsters because Job had already brought up these monsters. Job compared himself or compared his state to the chaos of the monsters. He saw his situation, what was happening to him was this disorder, this malevolent chaos was surrounding him. So in Job 3:8, Job curses the day of his birth, wishing that those who curse the day and are ready to rouse Leviathan would take it on. He imagines summoning primeval chaos to swallow his misery. And then again in Job 7:12, Job asks God directly, "Am I the sea or the monster of the deep that you put a guard over me?" Here, Job compares his suffering and confinement to God's subjugation of chaotic sea monsters. And then there's another reference where Job refers to these monsters in Job 9. So Job is the one that's conjuring up and alluding to these monsters of chaos in relation to what's happening to him in his situation. So Job is yelling at God and saying, "Am I just another chaotic monster that you're squashing, that you're subjugating?" So when God brings up Leviathan and Behemoth, it's in response to Job bringing them up. And so knowing that, realizing that, and taking all of this into account, I have a very different understanding, which is exciting. It's fun to learn.
Right.
So, yeah, we are definitely learning as we go.
100%.
And as humbling as that is, it's just the way it really is.
Yeah. All right, reading from this essay. The tendency to reduce Leviathan, Behemoth, sea monsters, and Lilith to ordinary crocodiles, hippos, whales, and screech owls reveals the unease invoked by the monster, a symbol of the unknown and irrational. Yet I would insist that monsters are persistent. They evade the rational evidence of science and reason most definitely, and are not merely unclassified beasts. The monster exists and persists in ways and spaces that beasts and animals do not.
So it was helpful for me, and I don't know if it would be helpful for anyone else, but I will offer it anyway. The author, Paul Seesengood, he basically depicts this continuum. And for me, it was just helpful to just actually draw it out on my page here. So if you imagine a continuum, a line from left to right in the center, he places animal, just normal, non-human animals. So then going out from the center in both directions. So on one side, he puts beast, and on the other side of that, he would put humans. So he's showing that human, in this case, represents logic and reason and, I guess, order, whereas beast is more of the non-order, the not necessarily malevolent, but the chaotic activity of a beast. So kind of non-order, which he's pitting against kind of as opposites to humans.
Right.
So beasts and humans, he puts
Like
as
the match.
Yeah, the match in terms of being, he uses the term antipode, which is kind of antonym or opposite. So animal in the middle, beast and human are opposite of each other. And then you go out even further from the center. And here he has two opposites, or a match that are opposites, which is monster, which would be disorder, the malevolent usurping of order, destruction of order. And this is more like intelligent, premeditated, willful violence, things like that. And the opposite of monster is the divine, God. So God and monster are opposite each other. They are kind of equal forces or something. I don't know if I want to, that feels a little wrong to say.
Right.
But they're opposite each other. And then beast and humans are opposite each other. And then animals are in the middle. So that continuum kind of helped me make some sense of this chapter.
I know, like when I read his take on beasts, I know that when I hear the word beast, I don't quite think that. I'm not saying it's not true.
His definitions are a little bit new
Yeah.
to our sensibilities.
Just reading on here from this essay. In his last university lectures, Derrida posited that a beast was an animal that transcended law and rule, eluding domestication beyond restraint. Beasts, Derrida argued, shared his status with kings and sovereigns above the law because they made the law. Sovereigns are equally unpredictable and unstable and potentially savage. Beasts are to ordinary animals as sovereigns are to human citizens.
Yeah. Interesting. Beasts elude domestication. They transcend law and rule. They are beyond restraint. And that's interesting that Derrida compares them to sovereigns, or as in people who are in places of power, who are also unrestrained and above the law.
Right.
Very interesting. Going on, like sovereigns, monsters are on a continuum intersecting with beasts, particularly regarding their savagery and lawlessness. But also, like sovereigns, monsters are antipode. Beasts are the antithesis of human and civil, but monsters disrupt reality and cosmology. Monsters are chaotic, singular, and sinister, hidden things that are malevolently intelligent and suddenly revealed. Monsters are the embodiment of chaos and of what we do not know. But perhaps more frightening, they are in their embodiment reminders of both the persistence of chaos and that despite ever burgeoning information, there stubbornly remain things we do not know. That there is a limit to knowledge because knowledge presumes at least some predictability and order. What order we have in this universe is tenuous and hard fought, and it is by no means permanent. Monsters are creatures of chaos, but also serve as revelations of an ineffable or divine mysteriousness that lies just beyond our vision. One thing I think is interesting, and again, it's probably because he is writing this really with a firm grasp of ancient cosmology, how the ancient person viewed the world, and I'm still clinging to my postmodern scientific or my Christian understanding.
Right.
Looking back in hindsight on Job, I want him to use the word evil. I don't believe he never uses the word evil, but he does in here use the word sinister, because it's very fascinating to me that the value of this idea of monster for us is that it does persist even in modern day. This idea that there are things that we do not know or understand that are malevolent, that are hidden, but they could reveal themselves suddenly. They're out of our control.
Right.
And this is where I get back to, it's so interesting that our conversation last episode, where we discussed a little bit that we as vegans pushing a Christian vegan world, we're not just going up against the human. We're not just going up against disorder. We're actually going up against non-order. We're going up against the malevolent forces of destructive, sinister, whatever.
Right.
Malevolence.
Yeah, and I think he's going to get into this, but it is interesting to me when he says that monsters, they are chaotic, singular, and sinister, hidden things that are malevolently intelligent and suddenly revealed. And he says that somewhere else. And it just makes me think of in our postmodern, whatever we want to call it, modern, postmodern world that we live in, that our minds live in, that we still, and he kind of gets into this, that we still need that horror, like horror movies, that they're still a thing, that even in our scientific world, there's, I won't say a need, but there's this myth that exists that we still perpetuate, that, and it's interesting when you, and I haven't watched a lot of horror movies, but the ones I've seen, the bad person, the monster, has almost like superhuman capabilities.
Yes, and are suddenly revealed.
Suddenly revealed, and they're like superhuman.
However, I would just be careful about the way you phrased it. I'm just going to push back a little bit. Like, it's not like we are creating horror because we have a penchant for creating horror. It's almost like, think about what it's like to be assaulted by some unknown evil when we go to the news, for example,
Right.
and we start finding out about something that's been going on for years that we were totally unaware of and thought was too horrible to even imagine. And then we find out, oh no, that's absolutely a thing that happens on this planet,
right,
to human beings or to whomever. And it's so horrific, and it's beyond imagination.
Right.
It's so shocking. It's monstrous.
Right.
And so it's not that we're creating a myth. It's that there is this uncontrollable, ununderstandable evil at work.
Right.
It made me think, well, who's that song by? Evil is Alive and Well.
Oh, Jacob Dylan.
I started listening to that recently as a result of our recent conversation and reading this. That,
right.
Yeah, evil is alive and well.
You know, it's lurking about. No, it's interesting. I know we don't want to go too far into the state of the world politically, but like, yeah, when I think about things that are happening, yesterday you saw this phrase that said, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and reality? And the answer was 6 years, which I think is hilarious because, yeah, things are so shocking to us when you find out that something that sounds so crazy all of a sudden is real, is a reality, that it's probably so shocking to the normal sensibility because we all talk about we're progressing, things are getting better. And then you hear something like, you know, the whole Epstein episode, and you're just like, that's crazy. That can't be. And so we start to say that's a myth, that's a conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah, and the powers that be who created this phrase, conspiracy theory, to basically make people feel stupid for believing their eyes. We don't want to believe it. We call it a conspiracy theory to make ourselves feel better. And then when certain things come to light that, oh no, actually that was true all along, we wake up from our trance to the official narrative that was kind of lulling us to sleep. And we find out actually monsters are at work. There's something monstrous happening. So the author reminds us that this is not unique to Job, this understanding of the monstrous in animal or in beastly or in monster terms, because he reminds us of John's Revelation, where John interestingly links animality and divinity. So if you think about the creatures in Revelation, he quotes from Stephen Moore, where Moore notes that the triumph of the Lamb over the dragon and beasts is not a bloodless coup. In Revelation, the Lamb matches the beast in its ferocity. He says in here that Moore never uses the word monster, but I think that our author here, Seesengood, would actually use the term monster in this case, especially since it's the lamb who matches the dragon. As in Revelation, in Daniel also, these beasts are ciphers for sovereigns. As in Revelation, God defeats these false sovereigns by out-savaging them. God conquers by out-beasting the beasts.
Yeah, and I guess I think about the ancient Near Eastern mind. If they were to hear this, they would think that way, that they would think of the chaos in the world like they would identify Leviathan and Behemoth with chaos.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost a little harder for us to wrap our minds around it, that chaos and maybe evil are personified in some sort of entity being.
Yeah.
I guess it's maybe easier to explain.
But I almost feel like, is this language I could take on? Because when we talk about, remember, even our discomfort in talking about evil last episode,
Yeah.
and it was like, do we just call it the force of evil? Do we call it demons and devils? You could also just call it Leviathan and Behemoth, the monsters who are at work to undo order, to undo the cosmology.
Right. I did want to read a passage here. He almost at some point calls these monsters chaos gods. And I think both of us might have issue with saying that these monsters equal God. That's not what we're saying or what he's saying, but I think what he's getting at is the only entity that can match them and or undo what they're doing is God, is the divine. And I just want to read a little here. Timothy Beale reads God's challenge to Job from the whirlwind, noting the role of the monster as a symbol of chaos and God's assertions of order, but of an order that transcends human sense, and concluding that God is, in implying Job's non-divinity, acknowledging the anti-divinity inherent in the chaos of the monster. God's power lies in out-savaging the savageness of challenges to order, of chaos, be they Leviathan, Behemoth, or even Job himself. And I just think it's interesting. From one little passage that he takes from Beale. Job is drawn to the monstrous as a violent invasion of unaccountable excess within God's established order of creation. These monsters are forces of uncreation, and as such, potential threats to the Creator. He goes on, but that's interesting in light of, I kept thinking about early on what we read from Walton in his Genesis commentary, that as stewards, as image bearers, our job is to create. That we are part of God's plan to create, to establish order in this world. And yet, kind of what we're saying, there are forces of evil. There are monsters that might be persisting, and they're creating chaos, and they're undoing godly order.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because that reminds me of what we read earlier, which I wanted to comment on, which is that whatever order we have is certainly not permanent. It's tenuous. It's fragile, right? Like, it's something that we constantly have to be vigilant about. But what he's saying here, what you just read, this idea that God's power lies in out-savaging the savageness of challenges to order. Again, this idea that God can match whatever the monsters are putting out. And that reminds me, just recently in church, we're going through the book of Isaiah, and Isaiah has a similar thing going on. There's a chapter, I don't remember which one at the moment, but where God is saying basically, I'm going to uncreate, I'm going to lay waste. And our pastor really did a good job of showing us that that sounds really out of character for God, to uncreate and to destroy and to lay waste. But it's in this context of, I'm going to rip out these evil institutions by their roots so that something new can be born. And it's like this agriculture metaphor. It's like tilling the soil. You have to upset whatever's growing there now and tear it out and loosen the things up. So it looks very destructive. But what you're doing is you're preparing the ground for something better, something pure, something wholesome and good. So it's very interesting, this idea that God confronts evil in maybe even a violent way in order to tear it out by its roots. And that's something to rejoice in, that God is getting rid of. And that's kind of a consistent theme throughout Scripture, in Isaiah, in the prophets, in Revelation even, that God is not going to allow evil to stand forever. God is not going to allow these monsters to just do their thing unabated. At some point, God is going to say, you're done.
Right. No, I just think the metaphor of cancer, right, or a tumor, it grows in our bodies, and it can get bigger and bigger, and at some point it needs to be torn out. Yeah, that makes some sense.
Just to kind of finish that little section, he writes, in other words, Job depicts God responding to theodicy. Theodicy is justifying God's goodness in the face of the evil that we're actually experiencing, right? So Job depicts God responding to theodicy to questions about God's reason and control and management of divine order, in the particular case, ensuring the proper distribution of blessing and curse, not with reasoned explanation, but with the assertion of God's savage power over chaos monsters. So God responds to theodicy. God responds to this question of God, how can you be all powerful and all good and allow all this evil? What the heck's going on? God does not respond with a reasoned explanation, but with the assertion of God's savage power over chaos monsters. So I don't know how that translates to our situations where when someone comes to us and says, how could God allow this to happen?
Right.
Or if our response is, God hates this.
Right.
God is going to savagely destroy this chaos that has entered your life.
Yeah. Point them to Job.
Yeah.
Reading more from this article. Theorists of horror observe that horror is the fearful rending and consumption of our bodies, but also the rending of the ordered, reasoned, comprehensible world. Horror is the revelation of what lies hidden as it suddenly bursts forth. Like Michel Foucault's fold, reality is shown to have a depth, and a depth that conceals some secret and terrible something capable of bubbling up or bursting out and showing itself. Horror is the awareness that chaos is peering in at the window. Even more horrible, however, is the fear captured in Freud's Unheimlich, the permanent other within ourselves. Monsters are the embodiment and persistence of chaos. There are markers of otherness that disrupts our world. They are terrible because they are warning omens, exposing the limits of order and the throbbing nearness of chaos. But also perhaps revealing as well that God or reason is not as immune from monstrosity as one might hope. Friedrich Nietzsche knew the terrible transformative costs of battling with monsters and staring into abysses.
That last phrase, Friedrich Nietzsche knew the terrible transformative costs of battling with monsters and staring into abysses. I don't know much about Friedrich Nietzsche or what he's alluding to here, that he knew the terrible transformative costs of battling with monsters. But what that does bring up for me is, again, this discomfort we have in talking about evil or thinking about evil or studying evil. I was just thinking, like, if I knew somebody who did their PhD dissertation on demonology or on evil in the world, I would probably think, like, you must be a little cuckoo. Like, you must be I'm a little worried about you, right? Because even to stare, as he says here, to stare into the abysses has a terrible transformative cost to it. So it's almost like we want to be aware and acknowledge the monster. But I think in a real sense, we have to be careful about staring at it and making it our focus, because I think it would change us. We can't look at it that long without it changing us.
Yeah, I wonder if it's what Kemmerer talked about watching footage of animals being destroyed and murdered. Like, we already understand it intellectually, and once you've seen some footage, once you've seen Dominion or something, maybe you don't need to see it again. It is transformative to see, but if you were to continue to watch it,
exactly.
I wonder, does it become like the Ring in whatever, Lord of the Rings or something?
It's like we weren't created to look at that, and we're either going to become desensitized or we're going to be destroyed by sadness and depression.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to do something destructive to our spirit, to our soul.
Right.
To look at it too long.
But I will say, though, this is an issue in some ways because of the state of our country and the state of where we are. I get frustrated with the people that want to maybe bury their head in the sand and not face the reality. In some ways, we have to face the reality of
I know.
chaos and evil, but like if we don't, it doesn't change.
And if we do, it doesn't change.
Well,
It's the sense. And if I feel like it is changing me in not a good way, like it's snuffing out my very life, my very spirit, I have to stop focusing on it. There's still life to be lived to the fullest. This is something that comes up in this podcast a lot, is how much do we stare into the abyss and how much do we look around us and see how can I love what's around me and who's around me and speak truth and create beauty.
I think sometimes the way I think about it is the sooner we do stare into the abyss is the sooner that we can change things. It's almost like, you know, you have a task to do and you keep procrastinating.
Yeah.
And it's just lurking there and you have to face it and deal with it, right? Sarah's looking at me like, oh.
You do understand.
You understand, yeah.
We've been getting some tasks around the house then. That's why he's laughing.
No, but right? Like you can procrastinate because you know it's a formidable task.
Believe me, I get it. And I mean, we both have expressed, and I still stand by, if you're still contributing to the chaos, if you're still participating in the evil, but you don't want to know about it, you don't want to look at it because you know to look at it, you would have to change. If that's what we're talking about, then yeah, you need to look into the abyss. You need to face it. You need to open your eyes. That's the only spiritually responsible action to take. And so people who refuse to look at animal agriculture because they don't want to know,
right,
that to me is evil in itself. I'm just talking about when it's something that is like this author and the Bible says, right, that God is the only one who can match the monster. And for us to just focus on the monster to the point where we are rendered useless and defeated because it has transformed us in some bad way isn't right either. He still wants to push back on me. I can tell. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is an ethical dilemma. And as I've said before, all ethical dilemmas are difficult if they're addressed appropriately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could say more, but yeah, it's fine. Well,
No,
I'm sure it'll come back around. I mean,
do you want to say more?
no, I mean, I'm good for now. It's a topic that, I mean, it's what we live, right? I mean, it's the world we live in. I feel like if you are living an intentional Christian life, you are going to be plagued with ethical concerns.
Yeah, and to some degree, we do need to have grace for each other in terms of this. Like what my spirit can handle on any given day might be very different than what your spirit can handle on any given day.
Yeah, right. And there are days when, I mean, just thinking about this, I'm sure, you know, because I get this pushback from people and friends, like, why you gotta be like this? Why can't you just enjoy life? Yeah, I do want to enjoy my life. At the same time, it's hard to enjoy some part of this life, checking out and enjoying some entertainment when there's all this suffering going on. But I mean, I get it. We also need to recharge. It's just...
Well, I mean, and look at societies, like the blues came out of extreme suffering and extreme monstrous evil.
Right.
They created art, which gave them joy to sing about.
Right.
I don't know how much of a cultural phenomenon it is, but I've definitely seen many videos from the rubble in Palestine of people dancing. So even in the face of evil, the human spirit has to rise above and find joy and find love and find connection and create art and beauty.
Right.
So...
And that just reminds me, too, what you said. Like, there is a sense, too, of even if, I hate to put it this way, but even if we never see victory in our lifetime, we still have to persist.
Yeah. I mean, I love that you brought up Kemmerer, that even she said, guard yourself. You don't have to expose yourself to the monster meaning videos of animals being tortured and murdered. Like, that's not healthy. It's not good for you. Yes, it's going on, and there's a part of you that feels guilty. I'm not bearing witness to the suffering that is actually being experienced.
Right.
But even she said, you've seen it. You've allowed yourself to be transformed by it. You're no longer participating in it. You're no longer contributing to that. But don't continue to go back and watch it, because it will defeat you.
It just reminds me, too, I'm sorry, Catherine Lowe, she's got an article she's going to present at the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics Summer School, and part of her moral vision is the sense of seeing, because we know CAFOs and slaughterhouses don't have windows. And so there's a lot going on behind walls that are just destructive and horrific. And yet part of her point is we need to see the animals. We need to see this. And this is, as we're talking about these people that want to consume animals but don't want to see the blood and the gore and the suffering. Like, they're complicit in it, but they don't want to know the horror. And yeah, there is some value in us exposing and or seeing this, right? That would transform. And the industry knows this. This is why they don't show you. And so, yeah, we're in this state where we need to see it. We need to expose it. At the same time, we can only take so much.
Yeah, which is, again, if God is the only one who can match the savageness of the monster, I mean, it feels like a matter of prayer. We have to continually ask that God would take down this monster of animal agriculture and animal exploitation, and the spiritual blindness of people who are perpetuating it.
It's a good reminder. Yeah, this article and what you just said, that we can do our part, but yeah, this is a big monster that maybe only God can match.
Yeah, but there is something mysterious about the power of prayer, that God wants us to participate even in these high dominions of power that we can't directly control, but somehow through prayer we can take action that way.
No, it's interesting you said that, because I was just thinking, because many activists talk about direct action, and maybe prayer is a form of direct action. And it probably seems to some like a cop-out, but maybe in this case, or in cases like this, we can do our part, but there are times when our direct action might just be prayer. Mm-hmm. I have to explore that a little further.
That brings us to his conclusion. So I thought we should just read the conclusion, because there's a lot of interesting things he mentions in there. Conclusion. Does it matter whether it's a beast or a monster if or when it eats you? He just has such an interesting way of writing. So many times I was like, is he being sarcastic or sincere? Because there's definitely a lot of both.
Right.
Especially at the beginning of this chapter. And yeah, he has a very interesting way of writing. Okay, here we go. This is his conclusion. This fall, a few weeks before Halloween, on Yom Kippur, we chanted the questions, who by fire? Who by strangling? Who by wild beast? Pondering together who among our community might die this year and how. Very interesting tradition. I think we should implement that in our family dinners. Who by fire, who by strangling, and who by wild beast. Okay. I'm always struck by the antiquity and primacy of these questions, and oddity in some ways to the modern ear, and also somewhat strange to the occasion. Who looks around at annual celebrations and events, birthday parties, sacred occasions, annual meetings of the Society of Biblical Literature, and wonders who in the present room will be dead by next year? Okay, sometimes I do, he says. And is death by strangulation or wild animal such a common thing we should expect it of someone next year? But I do find the prayer's interest in beasts interesting, reflecting as it does a very different, more natural and agrarian way of being in the world from my own. It recalls a people who understood both eating and being eaten by animals.
And not to be harsh, but the terrors of this prayer are ours really as well. This essay met the broader public, leapt from the shadows of my hard drive and into a room full of innocence as a November presentation during the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature in Denver. Within the state of Colorado, if not the city of Denver, the month I read this draft, there was very possibly someone who indeed died of strangulation. When it happened, she, and it was sadly likely a she, was afraid. The last person with her, the last person to touch her, was her killer, perhaps someone based on the terrible statistics of domestic violence she both knew and trusted. We, as we moved through the city that week in conference, may very likely have seen her. The darkness of chaos and the monster surrounds even now. We do not see it, but it is here. This is how monsters work, is it not?
Yeah. It's so interesting that he brings it right down to our present moment.
Yeah.
To go on here. To the eaten and torn, the question by whom is irrelevant. But to the remnant, to those left behind, it matters significantly. Beasts differ from monsters in both scale and system. Beasts are ordinary and common. Monsters are unique and ominous. Beasts destroy with a thoughtless savagery and disrupt the borders of civilization. Monsters consume us with a sort of sentient savagery, with a malevolent intention to disrupt the borders of order. Beasts are thoughtless and neutral. Monsters are intentional and to a worldview that emphasizes order and community as good. Evil. There's the word evil.
The question posed to Job is not one of the mastery of the ordered world. It is an acknowledgement of the inability to master chaos. The presence of the dragon in John's revelation, alongside its minion monsters, is the persistent presence of disruptive anti-cosmogony. The challenge of the monster is the codification, the collection of chaos. Monsters are warped points in the fabric of the universal order, chaotic singularities, black holes, drawing the disorder into themselves, into a disruptive pinpoint of disorder and chaos. The best, the only hope against them, the biblical text suggests, is God. Yet God beats monsters by being God's self at least a touch monstrous. God moves in mysterious and monstrous ways. Consider Leviathan carefully.
And that's how he ends the chapter.
Right.
Such an interesting writer. So I was thinking he kind of contrasts beasts and monsters here, right? That beasts are thoughtless. They destroy with a thoughtless savagery, whereas monsters consume us with a sort of sentient savagery, with a malevolent intention to disrupt order. And so I was thinking, I guess we have to consider human beastly behavior. Like humans can be beasts, but I guess...
Or behave like beasts.
Yes. Humans can be beastly, but I guess the powers and principalities, the force of evil itself, we would describe as monstrous, evil, demonic, things like that. But it definitely seems like, and I guess it's just in some ways common sense, right? That the monstrous can employ the beasts to do monstrous things.
Right. No, I think that's true.
Another thing that is interesting to me is that this idea of God being able to match the savagery of the monster in order to stop the monster. I think he says in here somewhere something along the lines that God is wild and uncontrollable, right? And so that reminds me very much of our conversation last episode, which was more specific to Christ. It was a wild Christology, that the ontology of Christ, the nature of Christ, in that passage where Christ compares himself to wild beasts, to birds and to foxes, these liminal creatures who can transcend different levels of reality and who are wild, they're undomesticated, they're uncontrolled, that says something about the nature of Christ, that Christ is a little bit wild, that Christ is uncontrolled. And so that's interesting that we're seeing that both with the nature of Christ, but this chapter and the ancient Near Eastern understanding of God's relationship to monster is that God is also a little bit wild and uncontrolled. That's a fascinating connection too.
Right. Well, it's just even the way he ends this chapter where he says God moves in mysterious and monstrous ways. I guess I had the thought that if you are worried about God being unpredictable and monstrous, my sense from reading this chapter and the sense of God in Job is that it's always for the benefit of creation. It's always for the benefit of creating his order.
Yes.
So he's not going to be monstrous in a way that would be destructive to us. I understand the deluge, and I understand what we were talking about earlier, removing principalities and cancers and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's all for the benefit of creation. My sensibility when I hear that God could be wild and monstrous, I'm like, well, he would only wield that kind of power to our benefit.
Right. And what I love about this book, if you think about our overall goal, the overall vision, which is to have more of an animal hermeneutic, right? That's the developing a biblical animal hermeneutic is the point of this book. It's taking these familiar passages and allowing us to see what's really there that is usually ignored by the modern reader, that animals, beasts, monsters, they are very present and have a very big role to play in our scriptures. And it's really fun to be able to take the time to recognize that and explore that.
Right, 100%.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for being here, everybody. And I hope you have a fabulous day. And consider Leviathan carefully.